You've felt that sinking feeling when she casually mentions how successful her ex was, or how charming that guy at work seems to be, and you immediately start questioning everything about yourself, wondering why she would say something so hurtful. Friedrich Nietzsche understood human psychology better than almost any philosopher who ever lived, and he would tell you that her behavior isn't accidental, innocent, or even really about those other men at all. What she's doing is executing a calculated psychological strategy designed to shift the power dynamic in the relationship by making you desperate for her validation. And once you understand the deeper forces at work, you'll never fall for these manipulation tactics again. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly why some women use this strategy, how it connects to ancient survival instincts, and most importantly, how to build the kind of unshakable confidence that makes you completely immune to these psychological games. Nietzsche understood that all human behavior stems from what he called the will to power, the fundamental drive to assert dominance and control over our environment and others. In relationships, this manifests in countless subtle ways that most men never recognize until it's too late. When a woman casually mentions other men who are supposedly better looking, more successful, or more interesting than you, she's not making innocent conversation. She's executing a calculated power move designed to shift the dynamic in her favor by making you feel inadequate and desperate for her validation. This is the will to power in action, using your emotional vulnerabilities as weapons against your confidence. The genius of this manipulation lies in its subtlety and plausible deniability. She can always claim she was just being honest or sharing her thoughts innocently. But Nietzsche would see through this immediately because he understood that every human interaction contains an element of power struggle. She mentions that her ex was taller, that her co-worker is funnier, that some random guy at the gym was more muscular, all while watching your reaction carefully. Your discomfort feeds her sense of control because now she holds the psychological upper hand. You start questioning yourself, comparing yourself to these phantom competitors, and most dangerously, seeking her approval to feel worthy again. Most men fall into this trap because they've been conditioned to believe that relationships should be based on unconditional acceptance and mutual support. But Nietzsche knew better. He understood that power dynamics exist in every human relationship, whether we acknowledge them or not. The question isn't whether these dynamics exist. It's whether you'll be aware enough to recognize them and strong enough to respond appropriately. When you understand that her mentions of other men are attempts to establish psychological dominance, you can choose how to respond rather than react emotionally. This awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your power and building the kind of unshakable confidence that can't be manipulated. Nietzsche distinguished between two fundamental types of morality that govern human behavior: master morality and slave morality. Master morality creates its own values based on strength, excellence, and self-determination, while slave morality defines itself in opposition to the master, seeking to bring the strong down through guilt, manipulation, and resentment. In modern dating, many women have unconsciously adopted slave morality tactics to control men who they perceive as having higher value or confidence. When she mentions other men to make you jealous, she's using a classic slave morality strategy, attempting to diminish your sense of worth rather than building her own attractiveness. The slave mentality cannot tolerate someone who is truly confident and self-possessed because it threatens their entire worldview. Instead of improving themselves or competing fairly, they resort to psychological warfare designed to make you doubt your own value. She mentions how wealthy her friend's boyfriend is, not because she admires wealth, but because she wants to make you feel inadequate about your financial situation. She talks about how romantic her ex was, not because she values romance, but because she wants you to desperately try to prove you're more romantic than he was. This is textbook slave morality, defining success by tearing others down rather than building yourself up. The man with master morality recognizes these tactics immediately and refuses to participate in the game. He understands that his worth doesn't fluctuate based on comparisons to other men because he has created his own standards of excellence. When she mentions other men, he remains unmoved because his confidence comes from within rather than from external validation. making him immune to these manipulative attempts at psychological control. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence forces us to confront a terrifying question. What if you had to live your exact same life over and over again for eternity? Every moment, every choice, every relationship dynamic repeated infinitely without change or escape. This philosophical thought experiment becomes a powerful tool for evaluating your current relationship patterns and deciding what you're truly willing to tolerate. If she mentions other men to undermine your confidence today, and you had to experience that exact moment countless times throughout eternity, would you still accept it? The honest answer reveals everything about whether you're living authentically or settling for treatment that diminishes your spirit. Most men avoid this question because they know the answer would force them to make uncomfortable changes in their lives. They tell themselves that her behavior will improve, that she's just going through a phase, or that they can change her through patience and understanding. But Nietzsche's eternal recurrence strips away these comforting delusions and forces you to confront reality as it actually is rather than as you hope it might become. If you wouldn't want to experience her disrespectful behavior for eternity, then you shouldn't accept it for another day. This test separates the men who truly value themselves from those who are willing to sacrifice their dignity for temporary companionship. The eternal recurrence test isn't about predicting the future or demanding perfection from your partner. It's about recognizing patterns that fundamentally contradict your values and having the courage to act accordingly. When you apply this standard to your relationships, you naturally attract people who enhance your life rather than diminish it, because you refuse to tolerate anything less than mutual respect. Nietzsche's masterwork Beyond Good and Evil challenges us to move past simplistic moral categories that keep us trapped in ineffective thinking patterns. Traditional relationship advice operates within outdated frameworks of absolute good and evil, telling you that communication solves everything, that you should always be understanding, and that setting boundaries makes you selfish. This black and white thinking prevents you from seeing the nuanced reality of human psychology and power dynamics. When she mentions other men to make you jealous, conventional wisdom says you should talk it out or examine your own insecurities. But Nietzsche would recognize this as naive moralism that ignores the deeper psychological forces at work. The Beyond Good and Evil perspective allows you to see her behavior for what it truly is without getting caught up in moral judgments that cloud your thinking. You don't need to label her as evil or yourself as good. You simply need to recognize that she's using a specific strategy to gain psychological advantage over you. This clarity frees you from the endless cycle of trying to fix the relationship through communication or compromise. Instead, you can make decisions based on what actually serves your highest interests rather than what society says you should do. Most relationship advice fails because it's based on idealistic notions of how people should behave, rather than realistic assessments of how they actually do behave. Operating beyond good and evil means creating your own values based on what produces strength, growth, and genuine fulfillment rather than following prepackaged moral codes. This perspective gives you the freedom to respond to manipulation with decisive action, rather than endless analysis and self-doubt. Nietzsche warned about the emergence of the last man, a type of human being who seeks only comfort, safety, and the approval of others while avoiding anything that might cause discomfort or challenge. Modern society has produced an entire generation of last men who would rather endure psychological manipulation than risk the discomfort of confrontation or potential loneliness. When she mentions other men to undermine your confidence, the last man immediately begins self-flagellation, wondering what he did wrong and how he can better please her. He accepts this treatment because standing up for himself feels too risky, too uncomfortable, and too likely to result in conflict. The last man has been conditioned to believe that his primary role in relationships is to make women happy regardless of how they treat him in return. He's been taught that setting boundaries is toxic masculinity, that having standards is unrealistic, and that true love means accepting whatever behavior his partner dishes out. This programming creates men who are psychologically castrated, unable to recognize manipulation when it happens, and unwilling to respond appropriately when they do recognize it. The last man would rather blame himself for feeling hurt than acknowledge that his partner is deliberately trying to hurt him. Society rewards last man behavior because it creates compliant, manageable men who won't challenge the status quo or demand better treatment. But Nietzsche saw this as a form of spiritual death, a complete abandonment of human potential in favor of mediocre comfort. Breaking free from last man mentality requires embracing discomfort, conflict, and the possibility of being alone rather than accepting treatment that diminishes your spirit and self-respect. Nietzsche's famous command to become who you are represents one of the most profound challenges in human development, the journey from external validation to internal self-creation. Most men derive their sense of worth from how others perceive them, especially the women they're romantically involved with, which makes them vulnerable to manipulation tactics like strategic mentions of other men when your confidence depends on her approval. Every comparison she makes becomes a threat to your psychological stability. But becoming who you truly are means developing a core identity that remains unshakable, regardless of external circumstances or other people's opinions about your value. This process requires you to examine your deepest values, talents, and aspiration without filtering them through what you think others want to hear. You must identify the unique combination of qualities that make you genuinely different from every other man on earth rather than trying to fit into some generic template of attractiveness. When you know who you are at your core, her mentions of other men become irrelevant background noise because you're not competing with anyone else for your own identity. Your worth comes from your authentic self-expression rather than from winning some imaginary competition against phantom rivals. Building unshakable self-worth is an ongoing process that requires constant self-examination and the courage to live according to your own standards rather than society's expectations. The man who has truly become himself doesn't need external validation to feel confident because he has created his own internal source of strength and purpose that no one else can touch or diminish. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch represents humanity's potential to transcend conventional morality and create original values based on personal excellence rather than social conformity. In relationships, this means refusing to adopt her framework for measuring your worth and instead establishing your own standards of what makes a man valuable. When she mentions other men who supposedly have more money, better looks, or higher status, the Übermensch recognizes that she's trying to impose her value system on him rather than engaging with his authentic self. He doesn't argue with her assessments or try to prove himself according to her criteria, because he operates from an entirely different paradigm of self-evaluation. The Übermensch mindset requires you to examine every belief you hold about relationships and determine whether it serves your highest development or merely reflects inherited social programming. Most men unconsciously accept that their role is to compete with other men for female approval, but this framework reduces you to a commodity being evaluated in a marketplace, rather than a unique individual with inherent worth. Creating your own values means deciding what qualities you want to cultivate in yourself, regardless of whether they make you more attractive to any particular woman. Your goal becomes self-mastery and personal excellence rather than winning external validation through comparison competitions. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of others. It means developing such a strong sense of your own direction that you can't be manipulated. Through artificial scarcity tactics, the Übermensch creates his own meaning and purpose, making him immune to psychological games designed to undermine his confidence through unfavorable comparisons with other men. Nietzsche's principle of amor fati, literally meaning love your fate, teaches us to embrace every experience as an opportunity for growth rather than wasting energy resenting difficult circumstances. When she mentions other men to undermine your confidence, your first instinct might be anger, hurt, or the desire to change her behavior through argument or emotional manipulation. But amor fati suggests a radically different approach, viewing her disrespectful behavior as valuable information about her character and an opportunity to strengthen your own psychological resilience. Instead of seeing this as something that's happening to you, you begin to see it as something that's happening for you. This perspective transforms you from a victim of circumstances into the active creator of your own experience. Her attempts to make you jealous become training exercises for developing unshakable confidence. Her comparisons to other men become opportunities to clarify your own values and standards. When you truly embrace amor fati, you become grateful for challenges because they reveal weaknesses in your character that need strengthening and force you to develop capabilities you might never have discovered otherwise. The man who loves his fate doesn't waste time complaining about unfair treatment. He uses every experience as raw material for building the person he wants to become. Amor fati doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting abuse. It means extracting maximum value from every situation while maintaining your power to choose your response. When you love your fate, you become anti-fragile, growing stronger from stress rather than being weakened by it, and transforming every obstacle into an advantage. Nietzsche's genealogical method involves tracing the historical origins of human behaviors to understand their true motivations, rather than accepting surface explanations. When examining why some women mention other men to undermine their partner's confidence, we must look beyond her conscious justifications to the deeper psychological and evolutionary forces at work. On the surface, she might claim she's just being honest or sharing her thoughts, but genealogical analysis reveals this behavior stems from ancient survival instincts related to mate selection and resource competition. She's unconsciously testing your psychological strength and emotional stability to determine whether you're worthy of her continued investment. This behavior also reflects modern confusion about gender roles and power dynamics in relationships. Many women have been taught that equality means they should be able to say anything without consequences, while simultaneously feeling frustrated by men who don't display traditional masculine traits like confidence and leadership. Mentioning other men becomes a way to provoke you into showing strength, while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. She wants to see if you'll crumble under pressure or stand firm in your own value, but she can't directly ask for this test without undermining its effectiveness. Understanding the genealogy of her behavior doesn't excuse it or mean you should tolerate it, but it does provide clarity about what's really happening beneath the surface. This knowledge prevents you from taking her actions personally or getting caught up in endless analysis about what you did wrong. Instead, you can respond from a position of understanding rather than reactive emotion, making decisions based on facts rather than confusion. Nietzsche's "Thus Spoke Zarathustra" presents the journey of a man who descends from the mountain with wisdom gained through solitude and self-mastery to share his insights with humanity. The confident man follows a similar path, developing emotional independence through deliberate practice rather than hoping external circumstances will validate his worth. When she mentions other men to shake your confidence, the emotionally independent man responds with the calm assurance of someone who has already done the internal work necessary to remain unaffected by psychological manipulation. His confidence doesn't fluctuate based on her approval or disapproval, because it comes from a deeper source that she cannot access or control. Emotional independence requires you to develop your own internal validation system rather than relying on others to tell you whether you're valuable or worthy of love. This means cultivating interests, goals, and relationships that fulfill you regardless of what happens in your romantic life. The confident man has multiple sources of meaning and purpose, making him immune to threats of abandonment or replacement, because his entire identity doesn't depend on one person's opinion of him. He can engage in relationships from a position of strength rather than neediness, offering genuine value rather than desperately seeking validation through people-pleasing behaviors. Thus spoke the confident man. I am complete within myself and choose to share my completeness with others rather than seeking them to complete me. This declaration transforms every relationship dynamic because you're no longer operating from scarcity or fear, but from abundance and genuine choice, making manipulation tactics powerless against your unshakable sense of self-worth. The woman who mentions other men to destroy your confidence reveals more about her own insecurity than your supposed inadequacy. She's using manipulation tactics because she lacks the genuine value to inspire your devotion through positive means. Nietzsche would see this behavior as the desperate flailing of someone trapped in slave morality, trying to diminish others rather than elevating herself through authentic excellence. When you understand these dynamics and develop unshakable confidence through self-mastery, You become immune to psychological games that keep weaker men trapped in cycles of validation seeking and emotional dependency. The question that remains is this: will you continue accepting treatment that diminishes your spirit, or will you finally embrace the difficult path of becoming who you truly are? Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to transform from a man who reacts to manipulation into one who creates his own reality through strength and self-knowledge.